G'day, my name's Nurchin. What is a mermaid? You know what a mermaid is. Are they real? Who knows? Let's get into it. So what is a mermaid? A creature with a humanoid top half and a fish-like lower half. Mermaid specifically refers to the female of the species, otherwise the term merfolk or merman can be used. This doesn't start with a single incident or a sighting, but actually multiple cultures and mythologies from all around the world. Now, note that a lot of this information is from mythology, but I like to treat my cryptids as if they actually exist, so some of the information you may expect has been completely discounted. For example, sirens. Now, over the years, the words siren and mermaid has kind of become synonymous, but they are, or were, completely different creatures. See, a mermaid is a half-human, half-fish hybrid, while a siren is a half-human, half-bird hybrid. The siren would lure sailors to their death with their beautiful singing voices. See, it's like songbird. Plus fish can't sing. Nevertheless, people often refer to mermaids as sirens, so that's worth keeping in mind. So we have these two worlds, the fantasy and the reality, and believe it or not, they tend to conflict. But when you're researching a creature that's mostly hidden in modern times, then all literature from the past should be considered a resource. Now, a lot of it was directly tied to the gods, and it's so fantastical it's easily discounted. It was 2,000 feet high and smelt like a lobster shack. Trash, we don't need it. But there's one part that remains fairly consistent, and that's of its appearance. Its gorgeous human upper half and its fishy lower half. There's a few things that may jump to mind, like Disney's Little Mermaid or the decorations on maps, but there's 1,000 other sources throughout literature, film, series, video games, whatever the hell, but also real life. Long green hair, pale skin, large eyes, and I'm not describing your average anime protagonist. These are actually descriptions reported by our favourite source of nautical information, a ye olde sailors. This is a go-to for mermaid evidence, but unfortunately it isn't that reliable. Most of these blokes have been at sea for many days, often very ill. The eyewitness accounts are from very far away, and most of them hadn't seen a woman in many months, maybe lowering their standard for gorgeous mistress of the sea. An iconic example of this being the FeeJee Mermaid. This is a dead mermaid sold by Japanese traders for thousands of dollars that later turned out to be an abomination of paper mache, a monkey skeleton, and some kind of salmon. It's horrifying, but later became an icon of fake curiosities. And on the note of sailors, they were suckers for superstition, and mermaids were often an omen of doom, either in the near future or they would bring it themselves. Now, there are a lot of tales of mermaids luring sailors into the water to drown them, though I think that's still more of a dilution between them and the sirens. It's also worth noting a lot of old superstition was kind of sexist, and it was more about sowing distrust in powerful or alluring women rather than actually for the sailors' safety. Kind of like the old witch hunts. Hey, I didn't write the history books. I mean, I'd give a fish a smooch. Would I? So, what were these sailors actually seeing? Many today believe they were just seeing manatees or sea cows. I know, most of you guys probably already knew that one. That order of aquatic mammal is even called a sirenia. They're about the right size, and from a distance could be mistaken for humanoid. You slap some seaweed on that and BAM! You've got yourself a very ugly mermaid. In 1493, Christopher Columbus reported seeing 3 mermaids, and was surprised to announce they were actually pretty ugly. So yeah, sea cow checks out. But here on this channel we don't settle for low-hanging fruit, no sir. So here are a couple of theories to explain the existence of mermaids. And this brings me to one of my favourite papers ever written on a cryptid. Mermaids, Their Biology, Culture and Demise, written by Carl Bantz and published in the American Journal of Limnology and Oceanography. Despite being a completely tongue-in-cheek article, the research and ideas are creative and they answer the question but what if, rather than just slamming the door at the start. Now, I don't agree with all the assumptions, but here are some of the interesting points made in the article. First, Bantz questions the validity of the sightings, not of their existence, but of the scales. He said it's far more likely the bottom half would be covered in horny skin folds, like a zenatha rather than scales. This is a fair point, and it goes for all hybrid species. It's worth considering a mid-ground between the two rather than a cutoff point. With the top half, he also notes the visible lack of blubber, which means they would have to live in more tropical oceans. It also kind of debunks any theories of them hidden in a very sunken Atlantis, because you only go a few meters below water and temperatures plummet. He also notes the two breasts of the female imply, like humans, they probably only have one or two offspring at a time. He also notes that with opposable thumbs, they may have been able to use tools. Most of this checks out, but I do diverge a little bit at the tools. This implies you can't trust the sightings for scales, but you can for the dexterity of a digit, but considering the humanoid top half, there is some validity there. He goes further into the possible development of their culture, and I'll link the whole paper down below. I think parts of it are a touch of a stretch, but he makes some interesting points. For example, they probably never surpassed what we consider to be the Stone Age because they probably didn't have access to fire. Finally, he writes his article as if mermaids are an extinct species, and he offers a fair cause. Considering their lack of blubber, they probably live in more tropical waters. In these same waters, over the past few years, we've seen a huge increase in jellyfish populations. Now, considering mermaids lack a protective layer of scales or blubber, as the jellyfish bloom, it's possible the mermaids were stung to death as the waters were overrun. Grim. He poses a bunch of interesting theories, and I had to bring it up because it's a great example of researching a creature with limited information. Now onto a bad example. In 2012, Animal Planet and the Discovery Channel aired a mockumentary called Mermaids, the Body Found. Tricky thing is, a lot of the audience didn't realize it was supposed to be fake and took all the information as legit. That's because the show isn't that blatant about being fake. Plus, the story they develop is based on a real theory called the aquatic ape. Hypothesized in 1960 by Alistair Hardy, the theory is that millions of years ago, a branch of the great apes split off to hunt by the ocean, which later led to the characteristics defined in modern man. We lost our fur coat to help with swimming, we became bipedal to help with wading, and we even developed partial webbing between our fingers. You just looked, didn't you? The theory is heavily criticized and very controversial, but it is interesting. Now what the show did is expand upon the idea to imply that these apes stayed in the ocean and became the modern mermaid. Now, to make this theory work, they had to straight up invent some information and use special effects so bad, it made my face muscles hurt just from watching it.
This most recent sighting comes from deep sea fishermen.
Nevertheless, after it broke rating records, the NOAA decided to release a statement on the topic after receiving a barrage of calls about the government conspiracy to cover up the existence of mermaids. I mean, these calls probably think Wendell Elmwood isn't a qualified journalist. Which he is. Now here's a theory you don't see very often, a Nurchin original. Mermaids were islanders. Humans are a diverse species, with different climates producing incredible evolutionary differences. There are some coastal populations capable of holding their breath for far longer than other cultures, and they may have inspired the appearance of the first mermaids. Now, I'm not pointing to any culture in particular. There are many cultures that we never learnt about that have just come and gone throughout history based on different islands. So I'll build one hypothetically, and you can consider whether or not it's reasonable. First off, they decided to hide when spotted by sailors. Considering history, that's a wise move. Secondly, depending on the culture, they may have delegated tasks that require swimming out further to women, which would have inspired the gender imbalance within mermaids. Finally, a culture by the sea would most likely wear clothing from nearby resources, adorned in shells, pearls, and maybe a fish-like skirt. There have been cases where explorers have come across cultures wearing fur as clothing, and returned home to tell tales of the beast men. Now, I can definitely imagine a beautiful woman wearing a simple sarong and some shells being misinterpreted by sailors. How's that for a theory? So after all that, do I think mermaids are real? It's not impossible, but you do have to discount most of the fantasy. A marine species with hair and forearms is not impossible, especially considering how large the ocean is. But I really struggle with the idea of them having a developed language and culture, and I struggle even more with the notion of them all looking like gorgeous aquatic models. But maybe that is the case, and the species' existence relies on remaining hidden. But even then, I think they would have gone extinct a long time ago, and just managed to hold on through cultural memory. They actually tick a lot of the plausibility boxes that most cryptids fail. But again, they struggle with the fossil records. Though now, though weak, we do have an explanation. But I do like mermaids. There's something about them that makes us want them to be real, and has kept them relevant for so many years. And hey, if you're watching this and you're a gorgeous tropical sea nymph,